Welcome, everybody. It is Business Monday, prime time. We are playing in prime time. I'm here with the money man, Gary Sasse. Cha-ching, market up 157 points. Last time I looked, 157 points up for the market is worth what? $400 million to you? Exactly.
I can't count.
Yeah.
I've stopped counting.
You have people to do that type of math for you.
Is that what it
Let's
says?
start up at the Dome up on Smith Hill. Lots of controversies, lots of discussions. Nick Mattiello, obviously we have the Jeff Britt situation in one hand. We have the Dr. Pedro reported grand jury at the federal level looking into Dr. Pedro's billing. We've got IGT versus Twin River. We've got marijuana controversies, a story we broke about his deputy chief of staff being involved in a hemp business. According to Nick Mattiello's office, the speaker had no idea he was involved in this business. Speakers have 9 lives, 18 lives, 36 lives. What is the number of lives speakers have, and what's the situation today?
Well, the situation today is speakers stay in office a long time. These kinds of issues start to emerge. And what has happened is that over a period of time, you have to make deals, you have to work things through, and sometimes people don't live up to your expectations. On the other hand, the speaker's made a series of personnel decisions that make one scratch their head. Everything from having Gallison appointed as chairman of the House Finance Committee to some other places. So some of the speaker's personnel choices have been questionable. But you have to look at the speaker's term in totality. The issues that you raise are still being litigated. When the litigation is over, we'll be able to make some judgments.
A speaker's job is a hard job. First of all, you represent one district and nothing else, and you need to build a coalition. In many ways, Nick Mattiello has been wildly successful. This last year's budget, every single Democrat voted for his budget, including the 21 progressives who, burn him in effigy and call him every possible names. I believe a bunch of them called for him his resignation at one time or another. How does he take on these controversial issues, balance them, and begin to lead come January, especially what seems to be a redundancy, another complicated budget year?
Well, you asked the question before, how many lives does the cat have?
Yeah.
And so we'll see what happens. But he's done a superb job in paying attention to his caucus. His antennas have been out as his caucus has changed. He's been responsive to new people that have come in. And the other thing about Nick, where the business community, I think, sees him, he's been moderate to conservative, hasn't been an extreme progressive, and so he's walked the middle pretty well. He's balanced things out.
So I think he's done a brilliant job there. Listen, there is no business community leader, even high ethics business leader, who's making a murmur now. He has done a brilliant job of warning the business community in Rhode Island, be careful what you wish for. If I'm not here, I'm the firewall between crazed progressivism and reality.
But see, some of that firewall is starting to show cracks, not necessarily with the business community, but the positions that the speaker took on some of the right to life issues the last time. I think he disappointed some of his supporters in letting the process flow through as he did. So you're beginning to see, some cracks because he's because the caucus is changing. It's becoming more progressive, and he has to feel his way through and work with those elements in the party.
What's the agenda for the state of Rhode Island? What are we working on right now? We wait with bated breath for announcements from the governor's office or legislative leaders. We seem to be, for almost 6 months, certainly 5 months, trapped in an ongoing discussion, almost a unilateral discussion on this IGT Twin River debate, and almost nothing else. There's no other, we have the worst schools, RICAS scores came out, Year two, minuscule improvements in the urban corridor, just another another cycle of test results. No big press conference, no call the General Assembly back in, no strong action on education reform. What is our agenda?
Well, our agenda sometimes is muddled because of the disputes between the branches of government. Obviously the governor and the speaker have had their differences on certain issues.
Wait, we're going to make news here.
Oh,
You're
yes.
telling me that Gina Raimondo and Nick Mattiello, two leading Democrats, are not in lockstep with one another?
That's the impression one gets. I'll let you make the final judgment. But yeah, I think there has been some progress. And the mistake we make sometimes is we look at progress over a 3 or 6 month period. You really need to step back and look at it over a few years. So let's talk about that for a second. We've improved our tax climate. Back 7 or 8 years ago, the Tax Foundation had us rated the terrible 10 bottom of having bad tax climate.
Yeah, but I'm asking more about where we going. Well,
Well, you have to know where you've been to know where you're going. So one place, we've gone, we've tried to make the place more competitive. And I was mentioning that we're no longer in the terrible, we're not great, but we're not in the terrible 10 as far as taxes are concerned. You said education was being ignored. I would take some exception with that. There was a couple of pieces of legislation passed last time, which if implemented and which if properly funded, could be helpful. The site-based management, linking curriculum up, with program. So there have been steps on education. There have been steps on improving the business climate. Once you put some of these programs in place, you can't change them every year, and so they've stayed the course. I don't agree with what the course is always, but they have stayed the course. So they've stayed the course in economic.
But I got a fourth grader, right? I've got a fourth grader in public schools in Rhode Island. I look at those test results and I'm horrified. And how many years, in what grade should I expect that my child's going to get a vaguely competent level of education?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on where your child lives and what you want to spend on his education.
Okay, almost in every city and town in the state, almost every single city and town, more than 50% fail to meet or exceed expectations.
Right, and you have to look at what happens in every city and every other state as to what the percentage is. We're behind. It's been well documented that Massachusetts has done a better job, that Massachusetts has stayed the course. We have been much too influenced by interest groups and adults and special politics, and we haven't done what we knew we needed to do. Hopefully there's a new beginning, but people have a right to be impatient, because I can remember when Bruce Summer was governor, I chaired a commission called the 21st Century Education Commission. And the recommendations in that commission, not all that dissimilar.
No, they are not.
From what is
Right.
being said now. So it's not that we didn't know what to do, but we haven't had the political will. And there's a case to be made that the speaker and other leaders should have been more affirmative in standing up to some of the unions. The Evergreen contract bill that was approved this last session is counter to what you want to do. Providence is a great example. We want to give the state takes over.
Yeah.
This is interesting. The state takes over. The state recognizes that in taking over, they have to make significant changes, and yet at the same time, when people are applauding the initiative, they pass a bill saying that contracts stay in force until another contract's adopted.
Right.
And that's where we kind of, find
So in the
ourselves.
last year, we had the first round of RICAS test horrified everyone. There was great outrage across the board from communities, from legislators, from elected statewide leaders, special interest groups across. Then the Hopkins report came out and painted a dire picture of the condition of Providence schools, got lambasted in editorial comments across the country, became a laughingstock from our educational quality. The state announced it was going to take over the system. We're now 4 working days away from the state's takeover. We have no new policies. We have no superintendent. We have no monetary changes. We have no discipline changes. Where's the clock? Where's the alarm clock?
Well, where's the urgency is what you're asking. And,
Yep.
and let me be the devil for a second. Okay, so, the state was supposed to take over, as you point out, the schools in 3 days, November 1st.
Yes.
They're supposed to have an implementation plan in place 60 days later, January 1st. So I'm going to judge their activity by what they do and what they don't do in meeting those deadlines. And so it's to sit around and to say we need activity for activity's sake doesn't make any sense. And so on November 1st, one very good question. If a superintendent is not in place, that is a sign that people are not taking it all that seriously, because you would expect the day the state takes over, they would at least have their top person in place. Because what we do know is that there has to be significant and radical change in the governance and structure of the Providence School Department. And so if there's no leader, the date you're scheduled to take over, that's a telltale sign that this thing is not being taken as seriously. But there are certain benchmarks that I look at by what should be in the plan 60 days from now. And I'm not going to sit around and say they should have been acting more urgently. They weren't. I don't know what they're doing internally. I know they have targeted dates to meet. First is November 1st. My measure.
Well, let's go before November 1st. Before that, the commissioner said she read the Hopkins report and stayed up all night and cried and cried and cried. She said that at 7 consecutive meetings with the community. She promised during that there would be urgency to this, and she also stated that there would be a superintendent in place before the state took over. None of those things have happened. Further, she's leaked to the Boston Globe that she was up for a job in New York, and in addition to that, as we understand it, 2 candidates who were offered or had significant communications have voiced no interest in the Providence job.
Well, all I can do is deal with what the schedule is and what I would establish as benchmarks. I'm not going to get into who cried at night and who didn't cry at night. The state is scheduled to take.
What would Bill Belichick? Maybe that should be the test.
No,
now.
this is the Bill Belichick test, because if the game is played November 1st, he'd be prepared to play the game on November 1st. You ask a very good question. The question is, when the state takes over on November 1st, will a person be in place who's in charge of the day-to-day care, control, and management of the Providence schools? If the answer is yes, then they've met the target and we move on from there. If the answer is no, your question takes on more urgency. Then the second set of questions, okay, we need a plan in place by January 1st. What should be in that plan? Well, the first thing I mentioned, November 1st, is the appointment of the turnover superintendent. And then you need to deal with the pathways to transparency. You need to deal with developing a curriculum that's linked to the program and professional development. You need to have more new hiring process in place.
But I'm a parent, right? And I'm horrified about something that's going on in one of my schools. And this is Rhode Island. You call the top person. Right now, if I'm worried about what's going on in my child's classroom, who in God's name do I call? There's still a Providence School Committee. The Providence School Committee members say there's no definition of what their role is.
Well, then that's the point. There was a lapsed period. I would have suggested you call the superintendent that was in place, Fran Gallo. But as of November 1st, you should be able to call Joe Smith or Jane Smith, who is the superintendent, and say, things suck at my kid's school. It's a dangerous place. The water's leaking. The teacher's not showing up.
Right.
Whatever the problem is, and get it handled. And that's the key test as to whether they're competent and whether there's urgency. Will there be a superintendent, a turnaround superintendent in place?
In our lifetimes?
No, but today was October 28th?
Today is October 28th, I believe.
Well, we should have a Halloween tree and have the superintendent in place by Halloween. That would be a reasonable standard. But you can't, it's easy to step back and say, oh, the transition's smooth or it's not smooth. I look at what has to be done to change the system. We talked about the first thing. The second thing you have to do is she has to be very clear what the expectations are. On January 1st, every parent in this city, every taxpayer in this city, ought to know what to expect from the school. They have to develop the district-wide curriculum to make sure there's access to equal opportunity. They have to reduce the central office. what is it, by January 1st, we all know that there's a bureaucratic situation over there, and needs to be cleaned out. And so those are direct things that can be done. How do I know you're succeeding? What are you doing about curriculum? What have you done to clean out the administration and reallocated money so that it goes directly to what the kids are doing? Is your curriculum uniform throughout the city?
We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the Providence School Department. Is it time to take 10% of it? 10% of it and offer it to Bill Belichick as a contract to see if we can. We've been on a losing streak in the Providence Public Schools for decades. 0 for 16,
Yeah, but
year in, year out.
Well, you give to Bill Belichick, but if you give to him without a quarterback, he's not going to be any better than anybody else. Because the last time I looked, he doesn't run or throw the ball, nor does he block. And so you need somebody to do the blocking, the tackling, the passing, the catching, the whole thing. But the Bill Belichick analogy is interesting because, and this is the fourth time I'm getting repetitive. You got the Bill Belichick in this situation is the turnaround superintendent.
Right.
And the Patriots or any football team is not going to play a game without a coach. And so you need somebody on the coach who's responsible to call the plays. That comes from the commissioner working with the turnaround superintendent. We have half that team in place. If we don't get the whole team in place by November 1st, somebody should be answering some questions because there's been plenty of time to do it. And from the first day of the first week that commissioner was here, there were all kind of rumors, I don't know if they're true or not, floating around that this person or that person was being considered. So there's no justification, no excuse. If you're going to be the change agent and you can't put a leader in place by the time the takeover happens, which is in 3 days, which you've had 90 days to prepare for, then I think there's some serious questions. If that happens, then you move on to the next issue. The next issue is what needs to be in place, what in the plan needs to be in place and begin to be implemented by January 1st. That's what's required. And I told you what needs to, in my opinion, and probably other things, about curriculum, the metrics of what we want to achieve, changing the hiring process, evaluation. If you deal with those things in addition to building safety, et cetera, which absolutely goes with the territory, then you go to the next benchmark. Okay, how are you doing in implementing?
But why no wins on some of the easier things, right? Do we have a philosophy on discipline? The Hopkins report clearly lays out a complete collapse in the discipline in Providence Public Schools. It cites example after example. Every interview identified it as a problem. Students, faculty, literally fearing for their own public safety. That report was released in June. We're now days away from November. The school year's already started. Why is there not a new discipline policy in place?
Well, I can't defend why there's not a discipline in place, but the only thing I would offer is who's in charge. Now, is the state in charge? No, the state's not in charge until November 1st, correct? The reason Providence got to this point is that we had people in place, but it was politicized. The kids weren't the first choice, and so to say, well, okay, in the transition period, while we're working towards
Should the commissioner have a new discipline policy in place on November 1st? Is that a reasonable request?
January 1st is a reasonable request, yes.
But not November 1st?
You can't put the discipline policy in place without a chief. This is not going to spring up by osmosis. The law is very clear. The requirements are very clear. By November, we take it over by November 1st, and 60 days later, by January 1st, we have a plan. Now, if you could move ahead and implement some of the parts of the plan before January 1st, that's great. But there are definitely dates and times that you have to get this thing done by.
So let's go to a calmer subject. Let's go to Washington, D.C.
That's it, calmer, yeah.
The president has a very significant public policy, foreign policy success yesterday. I don't know if it was Saturday night or Sunday morning. As significant a military action as you can remember in the last few years, and he is nearly booed out of the National Stadium at the World Series
But
game yesterday.
He started this lockup stuff. He started. I was at the Republican convention when they were cheerleading, lock her up. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and you're not going to have me say anything different about that.
He has gotten very little credit, very little acknowledgement on the success of a military action, whether it was a direct action or a suicide bombing of taking out the head of
He
ISIS.
deserves all. He deserves. I'm getting calls.
Is that?
Yeah,
Are you already getting? Oh my God! Look who's calling.
That's right.
They're watching. They're calling.
Yeah.
They're trying. It was a text said, "Stay away from the whole ISIS thing." That's
No,
what.
yeah, no.
That's what Mitt Romney's just said.
No.
Marco.
I was going to be kidding. No, he deserves all the credit in the world. For ordering, that attack, and I think anyone that doesn't recognize that is not being fair. I find it a little bit ironic that one day he's talking about the deep state, they call it. Well, and we could not have done this successfully if we didn't get the intelligence from the deep state people to do
right.
this. So, but he deserves all the credit, and to sit around and to say anything different is not being fair. But now, once that is done, then there are some other questions that you have to ask. Is our policy in Syria, working with the Kurds, is disproven by the success of this, because you need troops on the ground.
Right.
You need troops. You need intelligence assets on the ground to pull these exercises off. So we're withdrawing to protect oil fields. Every president of the United States has always said, this is the first one that's different, that we were not in the Middle East to protect oil. And every communist, every Russian, every Arab that's been anti-American, every Iranian says, BS. All the United States cares about is oil. Well, that's not what we cared about, but now that's what we cared about. So you got a president who has a superb success, and anybody that criticizes being disingenuous, he deserves all the credit in the world for that. But you wake up the next morning and you look at what's on the ground and say, okay, how can we have a future success? Are we putting policies in place that will make it more difficult? There's a story in the Washington, I think in the New York Times this morning, that talked about the operation being made more difficult because of the precipitous action that he took a week before in moving the troops and then dealing with Turkey. So there's not a consistency, there's not a predictability of foreign policy. But saying those things and criticizing his foreign policy the day after he's had a success is not a very...
Win's a win.
That's right.
Are the Democrats making a strategic mistake in not making this impeachment process more public in order to allow the general public to hear what key witnesses are saying? Some have made the argument, well, this is like a grand jury. Well, it's not a grand jury. Grand juries are legally obligated to be in secret. This process, Congress has complete discretion on whether or not they want to take depositions in public, on YouTube, or any place else.
I remember discussing this with Trey Gowdy up in New Hampshire, working for somebody else that was running for office, and Trey said that it was 50% more successful to have private conversations with witnesses. You worked on a lot quicker. There's a balance there, and then to be fair in that balance, you can't let person A know what person B says, because then
Right.
who knows what happens. And so it's a question of, you need to go through these private discussions, just as the Republicans did on Benghazi. They just changed the names, dates, and same things happened. So the Republicans, but
I guess my question is a little different. It's not so much. Go ahead.
But the clock is ticking. So your question should be, okay, have they had a reasonable amount of time to do this, to make this public? And I think you'll be getting your answers in the next week or so when this goes public in November.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that obviously from a judicial process that there's benefits to doing the interview process, but the timeline, I think, is extenuating to a period of time in which they're going to lose the public.
Well, not just lose the public, they're going to get into 2020, and you have an election, and that makes it even more difficult. So, yeah, they need to move ahead. They need to move ahead with all deliberate speed. But you need to recognize that some of this is best done in private depositions. Also, the White House didn't make things very easy.
No, they have not.
The amount of stonewalling that's going on has made it difficult to get to the public point. But your point's well taken. We are now reaching a point where we need to go public and get this thing over with, because the longer it drags out, the less consequence it may have.
I believe it was last Friday, Quinnipiac came out with a national poll that showed Elizabeth Warren with, I believe, a 6-point lead over Joe Biden. Joe Biden had a rescue mission last night on 60 Minutes. I'm not sure it did anything for him. The New York Times, I believe, had a story last week that Bernie Sanders has $27 million on hand. Elizabeth Warren has $23 million on hand. Joe Biden has $9 million on hand and is having a very difficult time raising money, even from after being in the Congress for 30 years and being Vice President of the United States for 8 years. Are we seeing a Democratic Party rejecting Joe Biden and moving and looking for another candidate? And is Elizabeth Warren that candidate?
Well, the struggle is going to be between the progressives and the moderates in the party. If the Democrats really want to win, in my opinion, they would lean towards a moderate, whether it's Joe Biden or Amy Klobuchar or somebody that is a moderate.
Bob Whitcomb, if you've been reading him, is all about Bullock. He's Bullock,
Bullock's
Bullock,
good
Bullock.
too, and Mike Bennett's good, and
Yep.
there's several. The problem, and this is what some of the criticism of Joe Biden is, both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, figured out that it wasn't going out to Beverly Hills and raising money or going to Wall Street and raising money, but you were better off, getting 10,000 people that could give you $25 a month or $50 a month or whatever as an effective way to raise money. And so they had the organizational infrastructure in place, recognizing that and Sanders proved this the last election.
Right.
No one should have been surprised that if you develop the Rolodex, you develop the base, you get people behind you that'll can give you
The
money.
database beats the Rolodex now.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point. Yeah, and so Biden has to play catch up there.
It's 98 days away from Iowa. He is, I don't believe, leading anymore in Iowa.
Well, I never thought Biden would win Iowa. I think he's running fourth in Iowa West also.
So he doesn't win Iowa. Then he goes to New Hampshire. He's not likely to win New Hampshire. I think that's probably a Sanders or a Warren win, being a neighboring state. And then he's got to hope and pray that he holds his African-American base down in South Carolina.
The polls haven't moved in nickel there. He still has a tremendous, like a 34-19 lead in South Carolina. I think it gets back to Super Tuesday, but that's who has the staying power to get
Right.
their share of the vote. So if one person wins Iowa, another person wins New Hampshire, third person wins South Carolina, then you move ahead to Super Tuesday, and we'll see. The Democrats need to have a come to Jesus meeting, because they can win this election with a Biden, with a Klobuchar, somebody that the public views is center left, not extreme left. And right now that they have two of the three leading candidates are viewed as extremely progressive. The Economist magazine this week had a tremendous story about Elizabeth Warren's interpretation of capitalism, and so I think Biden may survive as the best moderate option in this discussion.
Gary Sasse, as always, thank you. I'm somewhat offended. Please tell Senator not to call during the show anymore. I look forward to our next discussion, see where we are after the commissioner makes some announcements on Friday, or whether or not it's just a paper document mailed over to the city of Providence. As always, the Money Man is wildly intriguing and intriguing.
I got you.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Tomorrow, Kate Nagel is back, I believe. Don't hold me to it. She has Jennifer Lawless back on, who is always an insight, and a couple other surprises tomorrow. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.